Good evening to you. Welcome to Writing Seminar, Love, Sex, and Intimacy, week number 4, lecturecast. Professor Jen here. Always a pleasure to come into your virtual world. Happy Passover in the event that this applies to anybody, and certainly a happy Holy Week to any of you that are celebrating, and for those of you who don't celebrate any of this business, enjoy the chocolate bunnies. Tonight we're going to discuss a couple things in our lecture cast. I spoke to some of you on the phone today. You know what it is you need to do. I sent some of the papers back to you. I have more that I need to grade. They'll be coming to you tomorrow. Of course, it's my feedback. Everything's looking beautiful. Tonight I'm going to tackle two subjects with you briefly this evening as we're rolling right along. And we're right on target, so I'm very, very pleased. If I look down, it's only because I'm checking my notes, so I stay on task. All papers that you send to me, whether they're a literary review, the final paper, the questions of the week for week 11, everything needs to go in its appropriate drop box. I don't really want any papers sent to my regular email. So I'd like you to make a note of that. So here's our two topics for this evening. The first thing we're going to discuss is that since we're in week 4, by the end of this week you should certainly have watched the 2 films of your choice, because what's going to happen is I'm going to now, from week 5, 6, 7, 8 for sure, I'm going to be calling on people in the room, chat of course, to lead the discussion about some of the topics that I put out there. And I'm going to be asking you to reference these topics with the films that you've watched. Also, it's going to be necessary that you keep up with the readings from both books, as most of our assignments are going to be pulled from those chapters that are assigned for each week. The research paper is going to start happening for us next week, week 5. Everyone is going to have a topic by week 5. Because we're going to move very quickly. Week 5, week 6, week 7, week 8. It's really not going to be a long time at all for our developing, discussion, the writing of the paper, the redo of the paper or parts of the paper, and then of course final submission of that paper. So it's very important at this point that we go into week 4 but make a commitment by week 5 what it is our topic is going to be. And that's up to you, as it's going to relate to love, sex, and intimacy. I also want to talk about why is it that we write and the importance of writing. So many of you, I'm sure, have been reading for many, many years, whether it's comic books, children's books, science fiction, etc. Maybe some of you like novels, something called the graphic novel, fictional pieces, historical fiction, which happens to be one of my favorites, quite frankly. A story for me doesn't need to be particularly true, but I like it when it's true of the time. In fact, I have a sincere interest in anything that has to do with travel, because I don't get very far these days. But I like anything that has to do with cars, planes, buses, boats. And I love any kind of historical fiction, it seems these days, that has to do with movement and travel. Another place that I never thought I'd find myself reading is science fiction. That's a genre that never interested me. But there's this show on television called The Revolution. It's an interesting show. Maybe some of you have seen it. The premise of the show is the fact that all of the lights and the power go out and things come to a complete standstill. And then people 15 years from now have to live and survive in those times. So it's got a little bit of a science fiction piece, and I find it very, very humorous that people really can't seem to make it without their technology. There are so many different kinds of pieces out there. For instance, the reading of a play. I never enjoyed reading plays and such and such until I met a particular writer in a literature class in a book, and his name is Tennessee Williams. He's famous for so many plays: Glass Menagerie, A Streetcar Named Desire, This Property is Condemned, I could do this all night with you, 21 Bales of Cotton, and a variety of poems and all kinds of very interesting pieces. And all of his work always relates to love, sex, and intimacy. What really caught my attention about Tennessee Williams many years ago is that he was a playwright that was plagued with many issues. He himself met a lot of personal scrutiny, as he happened to have been a homosexual here in the United States, living in a time when you just couldn't come out and say that you were gay or lesbian. Many people judged his work harshly, as he spoke frequently of his sister Rose, and he spoke of Rose through many of his works, because in each of his plays he would discuss frequently that he always put something of his sister in each play. Interestingly, his sister Rose, in her actual life, happened to have been mentally ill, so mentally ill that they hospitalized her on numerous occasions and then performed a very mean surgery, better known as a frontal lobotomy, where they go into the frontal lobe here and they make a horrible incision and they take out part of the brain, and then the person is left with something called a flat affect, which means they feel really little emotion or they display none at all. Tennessee felt that his sister, because of this surgery that his parents demanded, he felt that in a sense that they had raped her, not in a physical sense, sexually, but they raped her intellectually and bankrupted her of any hope that she perhaps had. So I can understand why somebody like Tennessee was writing so feverishly all of those years, especially in these very provocative topics of love, sex, and intimacy. I'll give you some examples. He has one very famous play called This Property is Condemned. The play was plagued from the very beginning. It was very low budget. It had a very large cast at the time of notable persons in the play for the time. But the play talked about something that was so taboo in the 1950s and 60s. The topic had to have been incest and what it is to be a victim of sexual abuse as a child. Of course, you can imagine the play wasn't received very well, and then when it became an actual film production, many towns banned it, and it wasn't allowed to be shown. When I taught a film class here at RIT, I showed many of Tennessee Williams' works. At one time, many years ago, I had a class devoted to just Tennessee Williams. He touched upon subjects in love, sex, and intimacy with a little bit of courage and bravery that many other writers of his time couldn't even imagine that they could discuss and publish publicly. Another play that is famous of Tennessee Williams, maybe you're familiar with it, somewhere around 10th grade English, is Glass Menagerie. A sweet little story in a very sad way of somebody, again, who suffers from mental illness and also has what we would call a physical challenge, or then called a handicap. Today we have kinder words. It's called a disability. And the head character there, Laura, she goes through a provocative sense of coming to terms with the fact that she's no longer a child, rather she's her own woman. And that's something that we don't discuss very often in love, sex, and intimacy. I'll give you an example, something I'd like you to think about. In fact, if you're really paying attention, maybe you'll bring this up in the chat room. So if you need a pen and paper, now would be the time. Or you can just put me on pause. When it comes down to audience and why is it that people are writing, what is the message that they're trying to send to us, impart to us? It's a variety of things. Tennessee, through his character Laura, tried to tell us one thing in particular, and that was, at what point does your childhood end and does your adulthood begin? That's the topic I'd like to see if anybody challenges in the chat room. In fact, for those of you who were late in your assignment to me or haven't really been perky with the chat, You might want to pick up some extra points for yourself in classroom participation. I'll repeat it for you. If you could start discussing in chat immediately, where is it that your childhood ends and your adulthood begins? Some parents or caretakers never feel as though their children are full-blown adults, regardless of their chronological age. In fact, some of you may be suffering that now as we speak. You still have a parent that says things such as, well, I need to know things about what's going on in school or your life because I'm paying the bill. Does that sound familiar? You might have a parent that when you go home for Thanksgiving, the holiday break, or summer, all of a sudden they want to know, what time are you coming home? Have you eaten dinner? When are you going to do your laundry? And you don't even know how to respond because you've been on your own while away at RIT, and all of a sudden you feel like you're being babied again or treated like a child. Sometimes indefensive parents and caregivers, they don't know what to do with you when you get home because they sent you off as a small child in their mind, and then you come back as a full-blown adult. And now it's like having a third adult in the room. You, mom and dad, or you and your two moms, or you and your two dads, however it is your family functions. And they don't quite know what to do with you. So again, audience, and why is it that people are writing? Maybe to tell us things about from their own experience. I'll give you another author that I want to talk briefly about this evening that has to do with love, sex, and intimacy. In fact, let's bring up two more authors before we say goodnight to one another. One is Judy Blume. You might remember her. Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. The book Forever. She is really a cult classic. I guarantee you that most of your mothers and fathers have read one of her books, and perhaps you have as well. She's really in her third generation of readers. Why does she write these books? To help people transition in the understanding from childhood into adulthood, and all of the things that go along with that, including what? Love, sex, and intimacy. She even broaches subjects such as death of grandparents, or an uncle or an aunt. She was famous for talking about menstruation, people's first sexual experience in her characters, young boys and their first erection. And in fact, her books, from what I understand, have been translated into over 130 languages across the world because she tackles subjects that are so intimate, yet so timely, and does them in a way that is really so gentle. Another famous writer that you might be interested in at some later date to read her work, if you wish, or certainly to look into, is if any of these writers would be very, very interesting persons to bring up for love, sex, and intimacy. Her name was Sylvia Plath, very famous poet, but she also wrote a few novels here and there. And in fact, one of her novels happened to have been banned at one time. The novel was called The Bell Jar. The reason the novel was banned at the time of its circulation and distribution is because she actually describes in it, though it's a fictional piece, she describes in it a sexual experience between a white woman in college and her black male counterpart that she was very attracted to. And it was in rather graphic terms, this sexual experience and liaison. And so the book, needless to say, wasn't well received because our country and culture was in a place where perhaps it couldn't accept premarital sex, and certainly sex between different races. Fortunately, we're in a different time and place today, but the bell jar is certainly representative of a place and time where people in college classes had to sneak the book around. Sylvia Plath had a very interesting death. She died very young. She was very plagued with depression and love and intimacy issues. And in fact, she killed herself. And quite frankly, it was quite a loss to the literary community because she was rather young. There's another film that you might know of, and it was also, of course, adapted from a book. It was called Girl Interrupted. It came out about a decade or so ago, and it's loosely I say, developed around Sylvia Plath's real life. Maybe some of you have seen it. So again, the reason I mention these particular authors, Tennessee Williams, Sylvia Plath, Judy Blume, is because they really have some very, very interesting aspects regarding love, sex, and intimacy, and their audience in the time that they wrote their pieces. And for sure, I'm very positive some of you watching this lecture cast know of Judy Blume. So I leave you with these thoughts. Perhaps, again, if you'd like to chat about them in the chat, I'd be thrilled to see them. Maybe you'd like to share which Judy Blume book you've ever written, or pardon me, wrote that she had written. Perhaps you'd like to tell me if you've ever heard of Sylvia Plath. Perhaps you'd like to tell me if you've ever heard of Tennessee Williams. And let's see what we can do with some of these discussions. Of course, Thursday night I'm going to be posting some more assignments from both books. And of course, they're going to be obviously the same assignments that are listed in your syllabus. So it's wise that you keep up with the reading so you're able to answer the questions. I want to leave you with one final thought before we go into Good Friday, of course, and into Easter Sunday. On Easter Sunday at 6 o'clock at night here at my home, I will be having Easter dessert for any students that wish to come. It's 2500 Elmwood Avenue, very easy to find. I just need to know if you're coming or not. And if you are, I'd be thrilled to have you. I would like you again to, in your final thoughts as you enjoy your Holy Week, or whatever it is that you celebrate, I would like you to really think seriously about those term paper topics and what it is that you wish to research. And if you need help finding something to research, I'm thrilled to assist you with that, as it's truly my pleasure to find something that's going to make you happy and satisfy your quest for knowledge. What's the purpose of doing all of these papers if it isn't something that you can use in the future or even learn a specific topic for yourself? So again, let's repeat. You definitely need to start getting those 2 films observed and watched, because I'm going to be calling upon you to lead discussions in the room. Some of you I'm going to call upon maybe a little more because I need you to pick up some of those participation points. It will be necessary that by next week we hammer down a research paper topic. All of the papers that are due from me are always going to go in their Dropbox for that week. And finally, I wish you the happiest of holidays for this week's season, regardless of what that holiday is. Even if none exists at all for you, enjoy the extra chocolate that's floating around. If you can come for dessert on Sunday night, I'd be thrilled to have you. As always, good night, and thank you for allowing me into your virtual world. Always be well, and take good care of yourself.